Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story.
Subscribe, like, and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
It started the same way most birthdays do when you've been married for over 30 years, predictable, well-dressed, and laced with just enough passive aggression to remind you that time hasn't been as kind to your relationships as it's been to your scotch. The house was warm, filled with too many people I didn't really like, sipping from expensive glasses they hadn't paid for, in a living room that Karen decorated to make herself feel like royalty. She had always been good at appearances, better than me, if I'm honest. She cared about the curtains matching the rug and whether the hors d'oeuvres were served on real slate. I cared about whether the damn garage door closed and if we had beer in the fridge. There were about 30 people there, all milling around with practiced smiles, giving me the same forced congratulations you'd give someone who finally got their colonoscopy scheduled. The kids were all home, Logan with his fake Wall Street charm and two perfect teeth, and Ellie, bless her, who still looked at me like I hung the damn moon. Karen wore red. Always red. Said it made her look powerful. It made her look like a warning sign to me, but I never told her that. Dinner was perfect. Too perfect. Karen made sure the roast was done to the second, the wine decanted like we were in a Napa commercial. Everyone was in their seats like actors hitting their cues. The kind of dinner where the tension's dressed in silk and sprayed with Chanel, but it's there, crawling under your shirt like an ant you can't find. She stood up for the toast like she was the goddamn queen of something. Clinked her fork on the glass, smiled wide, lipstick flawless, teeth glowing, and started talking about how proud she was of our family, how far we'd come, and how grateful she was for everything we've built. I remember thinking she laid it on so thick, we'd all be slipping in it by dessert. Then she handed me the envelope. Right there, at the table, in front of our kids, her sister, her lawyer friend Dana, and that asshole neighbor with the fake laugh I never liked. A white envelope. Nothing written on it. Just white. Cold. Clean. I opened it, because what the hell else do you do when your wife of 3 decades hands you a mystery package at a dinner table? The room went dead silent when I read the first line. Petition for dissolution of marriage. It might as well have said, "Happy birthday, dumbass." I looked up. She was already staring at me, face calm, eyes sharp. That same condescending smirk she wore when I forgot to take out the trash or said something too blue-collar in front of her friends. Then she said it. "You're nothing without me, Jack. Nothing. Not a whisper. Not a secret. Loud enough for everyone to hear. Like it was a joke. Like it was some kind of final punchline to the world's longest setup." Logan looked at his plate. Ellie looked at me with wide eyes like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Karen just stood there, breathing like a woman who'd just crossed the finish line of a marathon she trained 20 years for. And I didn't say a word. I stood up slowly, folded the envelope once, then again. I walked around the table, leaned in close to her, and kissed her right on the damn forehead, like she was a little girl who just skinned her knee. Then I said, "Okay. Just that. Nothing more. No screaming. No flipping plates. No dramatic monologue about betrayal or lost years. Just one word." I walked away. Every eye in that room followed me like I was walking off a cliff. I didn't stop. Not for Ellie's voice calling, not for Logan's muttered, "Jesus, Dad." I didn't even look back. I went straight to my study, the room Karen always called that dusty little box you hide in. I locked the door behind me, sat in the leather chair she always hated, and reached under the bottom drawer of my desk. There, taped to the underside, was the key I hadn't used in 12 years. I opened the old file cabinet against the far wall. Behind rows of old tax documents and retirement plans was a thin black folder wrapped in plastic. Inside, 3 things. The original incorporation papers for Morgan Tech Logistics. A signed non-disclosure agreement with Karen's signature, and a copy of the trust deed, one she didn't even know existed. As I held the documents in my hands, I could hear the muffled voices outside my door. Karen's laughing again, already spinning some tale about liberation and how she was finally free. That's the thing about Karen. She always assumed the spotlight meant power. But me? I've never needed the light to win. Tonight, she played her best card. She just didn't know I stacked the deck 30 years ago. And the game's not over yet. It's strange how betrayal can make everything look clearer, like fog lifting off a lake just before sunrise, revealing the wreckage that had been there the whole damn time. After Karen handed me that envelope and fired her little torpedo right through the middle of what was supposed to be a birthday celebration, I spent the night alone in my study, not crying, not yelling, not even drinking, just thinking and remembering. And planning. And let me tell you something, I'm not the kind of man who forgets the fine print. Especially not when I wrote it. I first saw Karen in the university library, back in 1980. I remember that because it was the same year Reagan got elected, and the whole damn campus was split down the middle, suits and slogans, red ties and protest signs. She was sitting on the floor between the business and philosophy sections, wearing a leather jacket 2 sizes too big and reading a book she probably never finished. I was the quiet one, the kind of guy who always kept his head down and his mouth shut, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew the loudest guy in the room was usually full of shit. Karen was the opposite, loud, magnetic, and beautiful in a way that made you believe every word she said, even when she was clearly making half of it up. We started dating that fall. She liked that I didn't try to impress her, and I liked that she made everything feel like it was on fire, exciting, unpredictable, damn near dangerous. She had ambition like a shark has teeth, and I had ideas that never stopped coming. While other kids were partying, we were in the dorms sketching out business models and dreaming about how we were going to take over the world. The plan was always mine, the software, the logistics, the networks, but the face? That was her. She was the one who walked into rooms and made people listen. She had this way of turning charm into leverage, of turning conversations into contracts. And somewhere along the line, we started calling the company Morgan K Enterprises. Her name first. Always her name first. When we got married, I thought I was being generous. I let her take the spotlight because I thought it didn't matter who the world saw as the leader, as long as the work was getting done. She convinced me that the company needed her as the CEO, that investors would take her more seriously because she looked the part, whatever the hell that meant. I agreed because I didn't care about titles. I cared about the product, the process, the success. I figured as long as the engine was running, it didn't matter who was driving the damn car. But over time, the narrative changed. She started telling people I was retired, like I was some old houseplant in the corner that needed watering once a week. I let it slide. For years. Not because I was weak, but because I thought love meant compromise. And besides, the company kept growing, and so did our fortune. But something started to shift around year 20. Her stories got bolder. Her lies got slicker. People stopped looking at me like a partner and started looking at me like deadweight. And still, I said nothing. I've been quiet for nearly 35 years now, since 1980. Funny how that doesn't add up, right, huh? 35 years from 1980 would be 2015, not 2025. But who's counting? Anyway, last night, after the chaos died down and the house fell silent, I picked up the phone and called Barry. Old school guy. Old suits, old morals, and a Rolodex he still actually uses. He's been my lawyer since the company was a half-baked dream, and I was still coding on a second-hand desktop in a one-bedroom apartment. When he answered, I didn't even have to explain. He just said, "You finally want to play your cards?" And I said, "It's time." He didn't laugh, didn't ask questions. Just said, "I'll be there in the morning." The next day, I unlocked the cabinet behind my desk, the one Karen never bothered with, the one she said made the office look too cluttered for guests. Hidden inside an old binder, behind boring folders labeled old taxes and vendor receipts, was the folder I'd kept since the beginning. Inside was the original incorporation paperwork, signed solely by me, showing 100% ownership of Morgan K. Enterprises under my name, with a silent partner clause that gave Karen administrative access, but not legal authority. There was also a notarized copy of a non-disclosure agreement Karen signed in 1995 when we opened our second office. She never read what she signed. She just smiled, said, "Whatever, Jack," and scribbled her name without a second thought. That NDA? It states she can't claim ownership or authorship of any founding documents, branding, or development related to the company. The clause she liked to call the boring part turned out to be the bullet now loaded in the chamber. I sat back in the chair, holding the papers, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not victory, but something deeper. Calm. Steady. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to fight. I wasn't going to beg her to take me back. No. I was going to take everything she thought she owned and remind her exactly who the hell she married. Because when you build something from the ground up, brick by bloody brick, and someone tries to burn it down in front of your eyes, you don't run. You wait. You wait until they light the match and smile like they've won. And then you show them you've been holding the fire extinguisher the whole time and the deed to the building. And this was just the beginning. Karen never did waste time when she smelled blood in the water, and this time was no different. By sunrise, the morning after our little birthday massacre, she was already on the phone with half her inner circle, calling it a clean break and bragging about finally cutting off the deadweight she'd been dragging around for far too long. To hear her tell it, she'd done me a favor, like letting a dog off the leash so it could go run into traffic and disappear quietly. Her tone wasn't angry. It was gleeful, proud, smug in the way only someone with just enough power to be dangerous can be. She poured herself a glass of champagne at 10 in the morning and toasted to her own freedom with that snake Dana and a few of their weekend wine club friends who never liked me anyway. To finally being in control, she said, like she hadn't been running the goddamn show for 20 years already. By noon, she was already drafting emails to potential buyers, putting together what she called a strategic partial divestment, which in plain English meant she was trying to sell off 20% of the company to a private firm out of Chicago that she had connections with through Logan. That boy was always her golden child, her little shadow, parroting everything she said from the time he could talk, and calling me soft or old-fashioned every time I dared to offer a different opinion. Logan never wanted to work for the company, not the way I did, not the way Ellie did, but he liked being close to the money, and more than anything else, he liked being close to Karen when she was on a power trip. He was the one who helped her dress up the numbers, cut the corners, put the right spin on things so the buyer wouldn't look too hard under the hood. "Everything's clean, Mom," he told her, practically bouncing in his overpriced loafers. "Once the deal closes, you'll have the liquidity to buy out Dad's share, and you can finally run the company without him dragging it down." I wonder if it ever occurred to either of them that they didn't actually know who owned what. Meanwhile, while they were playing their little game of pretend CEO and executive heir, I was moving like a ghost. No loud confrontations. No last-minute speeches. Just emails, anonymous, precise, sent directly to the private inboxes of the board members I'd personally recruited over the last 10 years. People who trusted me more than they ever trusted Karen, even if she was the one who shook their hands and took the pictures. I requested a closed-door meeting for Thursday morning. No agenda, no press, no Karen. Just business. It's funny now, looking back at all the times I let her stand in front of the camera, let her take the bow at every launch party, every charity gala, every corporate award ceremony where they handed her a trophy for something I built. I let it happen because I thought she needed it more than I did. Let her shine, I used to say to Barry, whenever he raised an eyebrow at how much credit she took. Spotlights are bright and hot. I'm just fine in the dark. But there's a difference between letting someone lead and letting someone believe they're untouchable. Karen never saw the long game because she never looked past her reflection. She didn't see the small print in the founding charter, the one that gave me final say over structural changes. She didn't know that the 51% majority owner had to approve any sale of assets over a certain value. She didn't realize that advisory board she'd mocked me for creating was stacked with loyalists who owed me their careers. And she damn sure didn't realize the private equity firm she was courting was actually a shell company I'd set up 5 years ago, just in case this very situation ever happened. I don't throw punches I can't land. And I don't bluff. That night, as she stood in the living room swirling her drink and telling Logan how she was going to renovate the executive suite, new lighting, something with chrome, maybe that marble desk I saw in Architectural Digest, I was in my study finalizing the last of the documentation, double-checking every clause, every date, every bulletproof piece of evidence I would need to take back what was mine without ever raising my voice. When the sun came up the next morning, Karen was already dressed in her best power suit navy blue, with sharp shoulders and heels high enough to remind people she wasn't there to be liked. She kissed Logan on the cheek, threw her bag over her shoulder, and strutted out the door like the goddamn queen of the boardroom. She walked into the building just after 9 o'clock, head high, smile on, rehearsing whatever speech she'd written in her head about vision and innovation. But when she reached for the glass doors and swiped her badge, something happened she hadn't planned for. The lock blinked red. Then again. Then again. Karen Morgan, CEO, Woman of the Year, Lady with all the answers, stood frozen for the first time in a decade, swiping her badge like a woman possessed. The receptionist looked up, confused, but said nothing. After the fourth failed swipe, the security guard approached her slowly and asked for her ID. And right there, under the flickering lobby light, with a line of junior staff watching from behind their monitors, Karen's voice cracked for the first time since 1998. Because no one had told her the system had been updated overnight. No one told her her name was no longer on the approved access list. And no one told her the man she thought she'd destroyed was already 3 steps ahead. Not screaming, not gloating, just watching, waiting, and finally ready to move. By the time Karen finally managed to storm past security, her heels clicking like gunshots down the polished hallway, her jaw was already clenched so tight she could have cracked glass between her molars. She wasn't used to being denied, not at home, not at fundraisers, and sure as hell not at her own company at least, the one she believed belonged to her. The guards had been polite but firm, asking her to step aside and verify her credentials, as if she hadn't walked that path in $1,000 stilettos for over a decade. Her face was still burning from the humiliation as she burst into the boardroom without knocking, already mid-sentence, throwing accusations like knives. Who the hell changed the security protocol? She demanded, the room already mid-murmur, already shifting uncomfortably in their ergonomic chairs as she blew in like a hurricane wrapped in Chanel. Logan was right behind her, trying to play the role of mediator, his hands out like he was guiding a wild animal away from a crowd. Mom, just take a breath, okay? Let's figure out what's going on before what? She snapped, rounding on him, eyes wide and glassy. Before they try to lock me out of the damn boardroom too? Is that the plan now? She turned back toward the table, scanning the familiar faces, half of whom suddenly looked a little too interested in their coffee mugs, while the other half stared with the dull dread of men who'd been blindsided by something bigger than them. And then the door opened again. No one moved. No one spoke. Because Jack walked in like he had been summoned by the silence itself, calm, precise, slow steps that didn't hurry for anyone. He wore the same jacket he always did when something serious was coming, the one with a single stitch missing near the cuff, like a quiet reminder of humility in a room built on egos. He didn't look at Karen. He didn't need to. He walked straight to the head of the table, nodded once at Barry seated beside him, and placed a thick, worn folder directly in front of him. Karen, red-faced, raised her voice before he could even sit. What the hell do you think you're doing here, Jack? This is a board meeting. You don't have Karen, he said, so quietly and evenly that she actually stopped mid-rant. Jack sat slowly, resting his hands on the folder like it weighed more than it looked. Then he looked up, scanning the room, and finally met her eyes. "Let's talk," he said, voice firm but calm, "about who owns this company." The silence that followed wasn't polite or professional. It was the kind of silence that creeps into the corners when someone brings a gun to a knife fight. He opened the folder and began laying out documents, one by one, sliding them across the table like cards at a poker game no one knew they were playing. First, the Articles of Incorporation, signed solely by him, dated from the original founding, long before Karen ever stepped into a leadership role. Then the ownership breakdown, which clearly showed Jack still held 51% of the shares. He paused on that one, giving the board members time to read it for themselves. Next came the silent partner agreement, the one Karen signed back in the 90s, relinquishing any claim to structural decision-making without explicit approval from the majority shareholder, him. And finally, he dropped the hammer, a trust document in Ellie's name, which secured 15% of the company's assets under her sole authority upon Karen's voluntary exit or legal separation. The room began to shift then, eyes widening, backs straightening, little coughs to cover up the fact that some of them had clearly known and said nothing, while others looked like they'd just watched the Titanic split in half all over again. Jack didn't raise his voice. He didn't point fingers. He just sat there and spoke the truth like it was the weather. "Karen," he said slowly, almost kindly, "I let you pretend to be queen. I let you run the parties and collect the applause. But you forgot who built the damn castle." Karen's face had gone pale, but her pride wasn't dead yet. She stepped forward, voice shaking with fury. "This is betrayal." "You went behind my back," Jack interrupted, his tone like a final nail tapping gently into a coffin lid. "You filed for divorce, Karen. That means you just lost your protection." That line landed like a slap, and for a moment she was frozen, stunned, eyes flicking to Logan, who was now slowly rising from his seat, looking anywhere but at his father. And then Logan did something none of us saw coming. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a blue folder, thinner than Jack's, but with that same air of finality. He didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at his father. He just tossed the folder onto the table. "You're not the only one with secrets, Dad." The room stiffened again. Even Barry blinked. Jack didn't move. His fingers paused over the edge of his own folder, but his expression didn't change. Karen looked between them, confused, and Logan, with the kind of smile that only comes from watching something long held finally snap, said just one thing: "I think it's time we level the playing field." For a moment after Logan dropped that folder onto the table, the room stood completely still, the kind of stillness that doesn't come from peace, but from something sharp hanging in the air, like the second just before a car crash, where everything slows down and your body knows something irreversible is about to happen. Karen looked at Logan with a tight expression that wasn't quite surprise and wasn't quite guilt, but somewhere tangled in between, as if she had half expected this day to come and had been trying to outrun it for years. Jack didn't even reach for the folder right away. He just leaned back in his chair, folded his hands in his lap like a man waiting for a delayed flight, and stared at his son with an expression so neutral it was terrifying. Logan finally spoke, his voice steady and rehearsed, too clean for someone who had just confessed to betrayal. "I've been moving capital," he said, as if he were presenting quarterly figures instead of gutting his father in front of a boardroom full of silent witnesses. "Small amounts. Fractional transfers. Nothing traceable unless you were looking very closely. Over the last 2 years, I've redirected just under $6 million to an independent logistics firm headquartered in Nevada." He paused there, letting that number hang in the air like smoke. "They're now one of our top 5 competitors." Karen's face didn't twitch, which said more than any words could. She knew. She'd known the whole time. She might not have orchestrated it, but she sure as hell hadn't stopped it. And Jack, still calm, still sitting like a man watching a chessboard no one else could see, finally let out a low exhale that might have been mistaken for a laugh. "You were always her son," Jack said, not angry, not broken, just tired in the way that only a man betrayed by his own blood can be. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't even an accusation. It was just a statement of fact, like saying the sky was blue or that winter always comes eventually. Logan didn't flinch at the words, but something in his eyes shifted, like he wanted to be proud of what he'd done, but couldn't quite bring himself to be. Karen straightened up and crossed her arms, clearly sensing that the walls were closing in, but not yet sure from which direction. "You think this changes anything?" she said, trying to sound confident, though her voice was 2 shades higher than usual. "You can sit there and gloat like some wounded martyr, but the truth is you let this happen. You gave him access. You handed over the company to a family that never respected you." Jack finally sat forward again, and this time there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something colder than anger, sharper than grief. It was the look of a man who had waited long enough. "No, Karen," he said, "I gave you the illusion of control. You divorced a man you thought was just a worn-out retiree, a soft old husband with bad knees and a head full of memories. But this morning," he said, reaching slowly into his briefcase and pulling out a second, slimmer folder, "you pissed off a billionaire." He slid the folder across the table and looked directly at Logan, who didn't even reach for it. "The rival firm?" Jack continued. "The one you've been feeding my company's money to, transaction by transaction, late at night while thinking I was asleep?" He smiled again, not smugly, but like a man finally standing on his own foundation. "That company belongs to me. I set it up through 5 separate holding firms over 6 years. Its name, its branding, even its staff, every last one of them vetted and loyal." Barry, sitting to Jack's left, raised his eyebrows with quiet admiration as Jack continued. "I watched the funds move. I watched you get bolder. I let it happen because I wanted to see how far you'd go. And now?" He looked around the room, eyes meeting each board member in turn. "Now I know exactly who I'm dealing with." Karen said nothing. Logan said nothing. Jack stood. "I won't fire you," he said, gesturing toward Logan. "Not yet. I want you to sit in this boardroom every day and know that the throne you tried to steal was never empty. You just didn't recognize the king." The meeting adjourned without a vote. There was no motion, no second, no need. Jack had said everything that needed saying, and as he walked out of the building for the last time under fluorescent light, he didn't look back. Not at the boardroom. Not at Karen. Not even at Logan. The beach house was small, nothing like the mansion in the hills, but it smelled like peace and old wood and coffee grounds, and that was enough. Jack sat on the back porch overlooking the water, a worn paperback in one hand and a warm mug in the other, the ocean rolling out before him like a memory he could finally live inside. A soft breeze carried the scent of salt and something older, like redemption, maybe, or the slow erosion of bitterness that comes only when you finally let go of needing to be understood. Voiceover soft, like a memory echoing from a place that's no longer angry. "I could have fought her all these years. But then I wouldn't have won." Across town, in a house now too big for her alone, Karen sat at her desk, the light from her monitor casting long shadows on the hardwood floor. She opened her email and clicked on a new message, the subject line blank. Inside, just one line from Jack. "P.S. Check who owns your lawyer's firm." She stared at the screen for a long time, her fingers frozen over the keyboard, her reflection in the glass suddenly unfamiliar. And somewhere, far from the chaos, Jack Morgan closed his eyes, not with vengeance, not with regret, but with the quiet satisfaction of a man who finally played the last move in a game no one knew he was winning all along. Did he love her? Maybe. Or maybe he just loved the long game more.